If you're just joining us, hello and welcome to this exclusive one-off hour-long program with me, Alex Belfield, talking to a living legend and genius. And I use those words selectively because this man seems to go from strength to strength. He's more popular than he was in the 60s when he had his big hits, and he has never gone out of the limelight since those days. That is so rare, and he's also one of the few stars of the sex, drugs and rock and roll era that has managed to keep himself pure and intact. So many of the stars of that era seem to be dragged down by the showbiz and the hedonistic lifestyle, but this man kept himself pure, and I think that's one of the reasons that he's such a big star today. Everybody seems to love this man. I don't know why. His fans are totally obsessed. They're dedicated in an absolutely positive way. They will queue for days, if not weeks, camping outside of theatres to get tickets to see this man. I find it incredible, and I'm so thrilled and overwhelmed to be in the presence of Sir Cliff Richard. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. And the people you're talking about, of course, it is hard to understand. I find it hard to understand myself, but it's what they call fan worship. And it's a kind of, I think it's a hobby for people. You know, when you become someone's hobby, I've met people who are sort of frantic about stamps. And I'm thinking, what? This is baffling to me, and yet it's perfectly right for them. So I've given up trying to understand it, and I think, you know, everybody should. It's just one of those things that happens, and every artist has a group of people who will be outrageous on his behalf or her behalf.
How do you actually cope with it, though? Because one of the things I find fascinating is when you walk around all day and people are telling you you're wonderful, sooner or later, surely that's got to get to you. Do you have some kind of way of coping with it?
No, you have to pay attention to it because it's happening. I mean, and it's very flattering for a start. I mean, it's a very interesting thing that whenever I put my tickets on tour, there's always a queue outside whichever theatre we're going to play, and it's great PR. It gets other people's attention to the fact that someone like myself, who's been singing for such a long time, still has a drawing power. And in fact, it speaks instead of me saying it. You know, it doesn't work so well if you started off by saying, oh, these people do this sort of thing. So I didn't actually have to talk about it, but it's quite interesting. I find it fascinating. Whereas if I came into this interview and just said, well, you know, I'm absolutely wonderful on stage and there are people that absolutely adore me and love me, I mean, it would just not come across very well. So it saved me doing all of that. And so it's kind of nice, but I do appreciate it. But it's hard to kind of analyze. And I don't think it's worth analyzing because every generation has had these people. Every star, quote unquote, has had these people behind them, and I'm one of the lucky ones too. There's a group of people that really think I'm the bee's knees. What you have to do is convince all the other people that come that maybe they're not too far off the truth. You have to try and be the bee's knees, and that's when it gets difficult.
What do you think it is then that you do that makes them so passionate towards you?
Time usually does it. I don't remember this sort of thing happening when the Shadows and I first got started. I mean, it was a very, very exciting time, and we had thronged out halls everywhere we played. But I don't remember that sort of thing happening. And I think it takes time. It means that in some way, there has been a valid relationship that's grown up between us that I don't think, I mean, it's not a relationship in the sense that of the love that one feels for one's family or, you know, siblings, etc., or friends that you meet and talk on the phone regularly with, or, you know, dine with or go to shows with. It's a different kind of relationship, but it is a relationship. It is something that takes time to occur, and it's I suppose it started 30-odd years ago. I've been singing for about 45 years now. But it defies all analysis, really, although I'm sure it has been analysed and probably got wrong a million times, and I'm probably doing exactly that now, getting it all wrong.
Do you do anything consciously to continue the longevity of your success? Because a lot of artists come and go. I mean, we see that more in the charts these days. They have a number one and they're gone the next week. We never hear of them again, let alone a year later, 10 years later, or 40 years later. What do you do, or is it just by accident, the fact that you are still selling out huge arenas whenever you appear there?
I think what I can relax into is that whatever I did must have been right. I confound my critics, and that's a wonderful thing to do. And what critics forget, of course, is that, especially now particularly, they're not actually going to be able to damage my career. Because I have understood something that they haven't. And that is that none of us appeal to everybody. And usually critics, like ordinary human beings, have a particular like for a certain type of music, and if you don't fit into that particular set of parentheses, then you are treated and written up as some kind of pariah, and that's okay. But it tells you more about the person who writes those things. Whereas if you don't like somebody, supposing I had to go and do a critique of someone whose music didn't particularly appeal to me, I would do a little bit of background work on it. I'd find out how successful the person had been, how long they'd been doing it, whether they sang or played in tune, and then write accordingly a fairly heartless thing, just to say, yes, he did what he was supposed to do, yes, the people seem to like him, yes, he sang in tune, yeah, the guitar was in tune, and leave it at that. But they have to actually go personally into attacking an artist that they don't particularly know, just because they don't agree or like what he does or she does. And so I find that very amusing now, because I now smile at them all and say, well, I never have ever, even in the old days, never did a concert aimed at my critics. You can't. I spend the whole time, we're going to sit around here after you've gone and these people arrive for a conference with me about my show at the Albert Hall. I won't consider the critics for 1 minute. You have to go back. I go back through all the records I've ever made. I'm trying to think, can I leave out Living Doll? Could I this time leave out Summer Holiday? Or please, it would be great to leave them out. And I've got a whole batch of about 80 songs from which I can only do 28. So I'm going to present a show that's a kind of a history of pops as seen through my eyes and how it's affected me. And it means doing lots of my stuff and, fortunately, lots of other people's stuff like Elvis, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, all that kind of thing. And I know the fans will like it. I know they'll enjoy that. So I bypass the critics. And I mean, maybe that's unfair of me to say so, but I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying that that's the fact of life. Get a life and live it. And at least be fair to people like myself who are actually trying to please people who have queued out all night. I'm afraid the critics really don't come into my imaginings at all.
We're here today talking exclusively to Sir Cliff Richard, and if you're just joining us, you're in for a real treat, because this is the only hour special you'll hear Cliff do this year and possibly forever, according to Cliff's management. And I know you must be really tired at the minute because you're travelling in and out of the country promoting your new single Santa's List, which we're going to play at the end of the programme, and you must be so sick of talking to people like me, so thank you for giving us the hour.
It's all right. I mean, it's just a time I've become used to, that if you make an album, you can't just release it and hope something happens to it. And I've got a really, really good single in Santa's List, but you can't just say, oh, it's a good single, it'll do it by itself. I have to support it. So I'm prepared for it. But, you know, when I was 18, I didn't have to work this hard. And now I fly straight from Germany to rehearse on Saturday, to do the show on Sunday night, and then fly back Sunday night so I could be here to talk to you this morning.
And I've flown in from New York to do this because I'm recording a musicals program in New York. And thank you to Continental and United, 4 different cities I've been in to get here today. And I'm so glad I did. 24 hours in the air is worth it being here with you, because so many people wanted to hear about you. Of all the programs I've done, I've spoken to many, many stars over the years. And you're the one I've always tried to get, because people don't know a great deal about you. We know about your music, but we very rarely hear from you. So thank you for this opportunity again. Let's start at the beginning, your childhood. What were you like as a child?
Well, I remember being relatively shy, because when I was asked to sort of do anything in front of the cousins and the aunts and uncles that would visit, there's no way I would ever perform anything. And I started to want to sing at the age of about 12. And I could never sing in front of my family. It's really strange. And yet the very first night, the very first time I was given the chance to perform on stage, I went on stage and sang. And there is a difference. Even now, today, I still don't sit around, at home singing for everybody. It still feels strange. And I think as the years have gone on, I've become more of the performer. And unless I can do the whole thing, I don't really just want to sit there and sing. I want to get up and dance a little and, act out a song. And you can't really do that sitting at home.
Have you ever done karaoke? Because I would imagine to someone like yourself, that would be more terrifying than doing the Albert Hall.
I've only ever done karaoke once, and that was when my office, we have a Christmas party every year, and we all of us go out to a restaurant. We found one, a Chinese restaurant in Chessington. And below me down, it was karaoke night. So we had this big long table. Well, I got up and sang Mistletoe and Wine, and nobody even noticed. They didn't really. They probably thought, "Oh, that sounds very familiar."
Did you do it well?
I think I did, yeah. They kept showing bits of video behind me and all that. I thought, crumbs, if only my friends could see me now.
Let's talk about your parents now. What were they like? I mean, were they remotely showbiz? Could they sing? Did they encourage you?
My father played in a jazz band, not professionally, just as an amateur, and he played banjo, I think, a kind of jink, 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 jink sort of thing. So it must have been a trad jazz band. But he's the one that actually taught me where to put my fingers on the first few chords I learnt. And everything went from there. But my mother was not creative in that respect at all. And it seems it's not really in my family, because although, having said that, I have a niece who's a piano teacher, and she taught her sister over the phone, by the way. They were living apart at that time. Family had split up, the marriages come in and take people away. And she taught her sister to play over the phone, and I find that amazing. So she must be a darn good teacher. So there is musical ability in the family, but there's nobody else been a performer. I did have a cousin who doesn't sing anymore, Derek Clarkson, and he made a couple of fantastic, very beautiful country-type ballads, and a really, really fabulous voice. Now, I'm not quite sure what happened there. I'm not quite sure why he decided to stop, life obviously does actually go on in other forms. I keep forgetting that. There is a life outside rock and roll. But he had a terrific voice. So there's been some hint that there is something in the family, but I'm the only one that's taken it by the scruff of the throat and made it my own, and have used it to give myself a life.
Was there a single moment or something you saw on TV or heard on the radio or anything that made you think, right, that's what I want to be. I want to be a star. What was the moment that you thought, that's me, that's what I want to be?
Elvis, really. It's strange. I mentioned about wanting to sing since the age of 12. It was about 12 and a half, actually, because when I was in Australia a few years ago, this woman sent me a photofax copy of a letter that I had written to her when she was a child at school. And I remember the time because the school was encouraging us to write to people, just to get you writing letters. And so I was given an address of a girl, I don't know, Josephine or something, and I had to write a letter. So I wrote, Dear Josephine, my name is Harry Roger Webb. I live in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire. I go to the secondary modern school in Cheshunt. I like playing football, but my ambition is to be a famous singer. And I can't remember wanting it that early at 12 and a half, but there it was in black and white. I was walking with some friends in our local town centre, and this car pulled up. The guy jumped out. It must have been summertime. The windows were down. He went to the local newsagents, but he left the car running and the radio on. And we were looking at the car going, wow, look at this car, when we heard, Elvis singing Heartbreak Hotel. Now, he then came back, leapt in and went off, and we thought, who was that? We don't know who the singer was. So we then went, and in those days we used to listen to Radio Luxembourg, the BBC, of course, and also AFN, the American Forces Network, which had beamed in from Germany. You almost had to have one of those crystal radios. Anyway, so we finally found out that it was Elvis Presley, and that's what changed my lifestyle. Became something quite different then. I wanted to be like him. And most teenagers at that time would have longed to look like Elvis, and I used to dream I was Elvis. I used to wake up thinking, I am Elvis, and then go, oh no, I'm not. So it was a real tough time for me, but it gave me an inspiration that hadn't come from any other singer. Now when I look back, it's amazing how single-minded one becomes sometimes. I was so absorbed with the rock and roll phenomena that I didn't really pay attention to the people like Bing Crosby. I was aware of them, and I'd heard them singing. My mother and father played their records. It's only now in latter years that I've suddenly thought, wow, we were kind of rejecting something that didn't deserve rejection. It was actually rather stunning stuff, and these guys were really, really good singers, whereas we came out untrained and weren't great singers. But the thing about rock and roll was that it allowed you to mold yourself into whatever you wanted to be. Rod Stewart sounds nothing like me. I sound nothing like Elton John. He doesn't sound anything like George Michael. Mariah Carey is the pinnacle of all female singers as far as I'm concerned, and she's different. And what I recognize from that, and what I'm trying to say really, is that we had to discover something that allowed us to be part of rock and roll, but not a carbon copy of anybody else. Now, Elvis was my first influence, and it was painfully obvious that no one was going to replace him, and that I would have to find something else. So there's a piece of Elvis in me that's always trying to come out, but I managed to find a Cliff Richard feel and a look and a timbre to my voice. So I was able to mold myself my own route, and which is why, of course, again, we come back to critics. Every opera singer sings almost identically, other than some are better at it than others. But they hold, the diaphragm is used in the same way, the notes are held to the same precise length of time, they're hit in a particular way. Whereas, as I say, Rod can sing the same song I would sing, and we would sound eons apart. We would sound generations apart, or whatever apart, but so wide. Our rock and roll art form is such a wide art form. And so I really was appreciative of a man called Jack Good, who actually said to me, you look like Elvis, you sound a bit like him. So dump the guitar, cut the sideburns, and get on with life. Which I did.
How then did you go from being little Cliff Richard the boy, loving Elvis, to being the man, the star, the performer that sat here today that's a legend?
Well, I don't know how that sort of thing happens. I don't know about legend. Legends are all mostly dead, and I suppose some people think I am. But it's just that if you follow your heart and your instinct, you tend to find your way. You threadle your way through the jungle, so to speak, without really knowing quite where you're going. And I've often said this when I look at myself on those old video clips from the old TV shows. It was painfully obvious to me that I didn't know what I was doing. And as I'm speaking to you, for instance, we're analysing how I got to be like this, and I did have to change, but I don't remember the change taking place. It's only with hindsight that I can say, yes, I remember Jack Good saying, don't try and be like Elvis. You have to find something of your own. And somehow I did, but I don't know how that happened or when it happened, actually. In fact, probably it was a very gradual process, and I'd like to think that I'm still evolving as a performer. I'd like to think that my next album will be different to the current one. And that's the only way for an artist to actually approach his art form. You can't actually stick in the same mold. I remember in the early days of rock and roll, there were American artists who tended to make 3 or 4 records, and they did all pretty well sound the same. But, every couple of songs I try to make it different. You may have Living Doll and Traveling Light, and then there'll be something else. You'll have Miss You Nights, but you'll have Devil Woman. You'll have Devil Woman, but there's We Don't Talk Anymore. And so it's necessary to change. But I really don't know what happened. I think honesty counts for something. If you're honest about what you do, and one of the best ways of proving your honesty is true, is that you don't veer from the route that you say you're taking. And I've never done that. I've never veered from what I like to do, which is pop rock music. I don't mind being called a pop singer. Some people say, I'm not a pop singer. I'll say, well, what are you? Are you jazz? Are you classical? No, you're not. You're a pop rock singer, whatever you like. But rock and roll is so wide, people are even trying to find categories within the umbrella term of pop rock. And yet, when you think about it, Des O'Connor had pop hits way back, and Led Zeppelin on the far right. And there's a whole gamut of stuff right in the middle that you can dabble in without any kind of real criticism being true.
Let's talk about what happened next, because there was 2 things I think that really fought the way forward for you. The fact that A, you had a personality, and B, you had very good looks. And I noticed behind us on your wall here in your living room, there's a picture of you there. When you look at that, can you see that as you, or do you see that as branding of someone else that you kind of remember that you were?
I recognize it as me instantly. Those old pictures I recognize instantly, and there's something about the black and whiteness of it that I really like. It's one of those pictures. For instance, if I was to put that in one of those bars that you see pictures of James Dean in, it would fit in perfectly. It's exactly the same stereotype almost of black and white photography that was done in those days. But I don't see it as me now. When I'm shaving in the morning now, I see a different Cliff Richard now. I really do. And I'm very flattered when people say, oh, the Peter Pan of pop and stuff. But I don't look like that photograph that you're looking at. Now, everyone's face changes, and my face has changed. But there's enough of the old resemblance. I mean, for instance, I go on this last tour, I went to Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, Korea, where I hadn't been, in some cases, for almost 30 years. And I was instantly recognized on the streets. And I'm thinking, this is impossible. So there must be enough of that 19-year-old Cliff Richard still in the facade of my face. And so I'm pleased with that. But when I look at myself, I don't see that young Cliff Richard anymore. I feel like that, though.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do. I don't know how to feel. People are always talking about age. Nowadays, if you notice, journalists will say, aging millionaire pop star. They always have these kind of descriptive phrases prior to your name. And you think, well, who wants to be known as aging? And in fact, everybody is aging. You could say aging 5-year-old son of so-and-so. Because everybody's aging. With every second that we speak, we've both of us aged. So I know I've aged. Of course I have. And if I haven't aged wildly and badly, then it's good fortune, isn't it? That it does bode well, really, for me in the future, because I can still appear on stage and give that there's an element of disguise about what I do without having to put on too much makeup.
You look very fit. I mean, presumably you are very well, are you?
Yes, I am very well. Actually, my doctor keeps asking me to go in and have checkups, which I do. And she's almost annoyed that my blood pressure's correct. And she says, oh, it's all right. It's below normal again.
Well, what is that? Healthy eating or the exercise? I know you love your tennis.
I do. I haven't played tennis for a couple of months now because since I came back to do all the promotion for the album, I really haven't found time. And in fact, I could have found time, but usually if you've been doing 5 or 6 days of screaming around from country to country doing TV and press interviews and things, when you do get a day off, I tend to sleep till midday. And then I don't get out of my dressing gown until I've whatever. I may not even get out of the dressing gown. I may just shower and go back to bed again later the next day. But sometimes that can hit you. And so I haven't played tennis. But tennis is a great sport for, one, if it's good weather, getting you out in the fresh air. It's very social. You can call a friend or two and say, come on over. I've often had 8 people come over. We played tennis all day, got a takeaway Chinese and spent the evening together. It's been really good. And we've exercised. And, of course, if you practice tennis the way I do, I phone a pro. When I go to Australia or if I'm on tour, I phone professionals in clubs and say, can you play with me for an hour? 1 hour of hitting a ball with a professional, and you are wiped out, sweating. It's fantastically aerobic. And that does help. So I do. That's played a large contributory part in my being fit still at this age.
Creams, lotions, potions, do you use any of those?
Oh, everything that anybody has ever recommended. I go to a makeup artist in a Top of the Pop studio or something, and they'll say, oh, your skin's looking pretty good. Have you heard of so-and-so? And I'll go, I write it down, and I go get a gallon of the stuff and slap it on whenever I can. And yes, you have to try, I think, everything, because whether you be male or female, we're all pummeled by the same pollution everywhere. And if you are, like I am, as I am, presented all the time photographically, constantly doing television, you don't want to become a fat blob that has blemishes everywhere. So I do everything I can. But in the end, I think there's no harm in anybody using any kind of moisturizer, but there is no such thing that will stop aging. It has to happen. If you have the genes, if you're lucky enough to have the genes that maybe don't age as quickly, then just consider yourself really fortunate. My mum looked fantastic until she was ill. She has dementia, and when dementia hits you, it's not as though she's physically ill in any way. It's a mental thing. The brain cells start to die off. Her desire to look good went. She doesn't know how to dress herself. She was always so immaculate. And whenever she came with me to premieres of shows, they'd all right in the early days just to say, oh, he's got a new girlfriend. So she must have looked at least as young as I did, or probably younger. So I think that my sisters and I have enjoyed the inheritance of a gene that maybe keeps us looking good. And I say looking good because I don't think I look young. But as you get older, you can look good without looking young.
Are you embarrassed to say how old you are? Are you one of these people that say, oh, no, I can't say how old I am?
No, I'm 63. I became 63 in October. So I have no problem with it at all. In fact, I find it hard to even think of myself as 63. It's ridiculous. I can't feel any more than 18.
Let's break now for a piece of music from your new album. It's called Cliff at Christmas. It's doing gangbusters in the charts. Congratulations on that. It includes 8 new recordings and 9 of your huge Christmas hits from over the years. What song would you say is your favourite off this album?
Well, I mean, I should say Santa's List because that's the single, but it is one of my favourite tracks, but I love Let It Snow. I mean, I'm not sure if Let It Snow could ever be a single, but because it's an old traditional song and everybody absolutely knows it and probably loves it by somebody else. So I'm not quite sure I'd take the gamble, but it's easy to record for an album. But it's a great, great production.
Are you really proud of this album?
I am now, because originally EMI asked me if they could release a compilation album, a compilation of my past Christmas successes. Now, there haven't been too many of those, but I did do a Christmas album, and I've had two number ones. Everyone thinks I've had a number one every year. I haven't. I think I've only released about 5 or 6 Christmas singles ever in 45 years, and only 2 of those made it to number one. But the album, I thought, compilations, fans usually have those songs in some format or other. That's the reason why I sometimes don't like compilations. But I asked EMI if I could go back in the studio and record some new stuff. So they said, yeah. So I went up and dug up, and 8 of the 17 tracks, so it's very nearly half the album, are new things. 8 tracks would be 2/3 of a brand new album. So please don't feel you're wasting your money. There is something of interest on there. And I happened to find, of the 8 songs, 7 are well-known songs, but I found 1 brand new song.
Does that ever become normal when you're just driving down the road and you're hearing everybody else's songs? It's just that wall of sound. And then suddenly your song that you recorded maybe years ago, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or just last week comes on the radio. How does that feel, and does it ever become normal?
No, it'll never be normal. And less normal now, of course. I mean, in the early days, even now, I still consider that records are actually made for the radio. They're synonymous. They should be together. But I'm not in that equation anymore. I mean, for whatever reason, I can't force people to play my music. It's their loss as far as I'm concerned. But I get on with my life in some other way. I have to try and find airplay via the TV stations now. But with TV, if you do a show, people only hear it once. The thing about radio is it gives people a chance to grow to like your music. Because most music is very subjective, certainly when it begins with the artist. We think all our songs are fabulous. I think every track on my album is really spot on. But sometimes when a fan has 100 different artists in their collection. It takes 2 or 3 listenings to go, he's right, that is a good song. You know what I mean? And so you need that. So I don't have that pleasure anymore. But when I hear a record of mine come on the radio, I have to say I turn the volume up immediately. Oh, I got to hear this is me on the radio. That's never going to change. I can't see how that will ever change. It's like most people have heard their voices for the first time on a tape. And it's like that, only a million times better, because you've got an orchestra behind you or something, or a fabulous band like the Shadows playing for you, and your voice is up there with a beautiful piece of echo that just takes it over the top. So, no, it'll never be normal.
Has pop lost the magic today? Because I see it as so clinical now. It's almost to the point where I'm sick of hearing pop songs, and there doesn't seem any personality in it whatsoever, or any choice on their part, and they don't seem totally happy, and moreover, they don't make any money out of it.
There is a problem with the industry at the moment in that it's become a bit stereotyped, which is what you're probably railing against. The fact that, for instance, if you listen even to Pop Idols or the Fame Academy, those kind of shows, you'll hear some really good singers. I mean, I've heard some really good singers, but they don't sound like, well, they don't sound like them. They sound like someone else. And that's probably was true of me when I first started. I tried to sound like Elvis. So it takes time for us to discover whether these people actually have a voice of their own or a style of their own. Unfortunately, you were right. People seem to come and go. They're in the charts and then they're gone, never to be heard of again. And there should be no reason for that. But every now and then you'll hear a Daniel Bedingfield or a Craig David, and you think, these guys are really good. Now, but will they be here in 10 years? It's really up to them, because they have everything going for them. They look good, they sound good. I don't know whether Craig writes, but certainly Daniel writes. They can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. If I can be around 45 years, there's no reason why Daniel shouldn't be in 50 years' time. Absolutely no reason at all, unless he doesn't actually want it in the end. So the danger is that pop has become stereotype. And that's partly to do with radio as well, because radio has now started to punch music at a certain age group, so that one station will only play rap or whatever, or only play this. And broadcasting is no longer true of anything. It's narrowcasting. Whereas when I first used to listen to radio, BBC Radio, you heard Frank Sinatra, Teresa Brewer, and Cliff Richard. Then then Bing Crosby and Elvis. You've waited to hear your favorites, but you heard everything, which is probably why I now have a good, healthy opinion of that style of music, the Sinatra, Crosby style of music. I now look at it, and I've recorded some songs, the standards, and I'd forgotten how long ago I recorded them. I was 20. Here they are now, Robbie Williams doing Swing While You're Winning, and I'm terribly sorry, Robbie, and Rod, if you're listening. I recorded all these standards 100 years ago as a pop singer. Okay, when I listen to them, they're a bit immature. In fact, I've had an idea that I might revisit the tracks, undo them, take my voice off, and re-record them the way I am now, but with these wonderful arrangements. They don't write string arrangements like that anymore. People have forgotten how to do it. So it's been an interesting growth for me, a process of understanding myself, trying to understand the pop scene today, which is very difficult to understand. But seeing what's good in it, you have to find what's good in it, and then you'll be excited again. And every now and then I do. I can mention names of people that I really like and think, oh, great, thank heavens for Mariah Carey.
Lots of little questions from things you've just said there. How easy was it for you to get your first deal? I know your first song, Breathless, you borrowed the money, I believe, didn't you? £10, I think it was, something like that, to have it made. How difficult was it, though, to get the first contract, the proper contract?
It seemed to be impossible in those days. And we just felt we'd already made one gigantic step forward when we found that the HMV store on Oxford Street actually recorded things as well as sold pre-recorded material. So my band and I went in and did this thing, and they gave us an acetate, what they call, a 12-inch vinyl cut record that wouldn't last forever. They said, be careful, it won't last forever. So we carefully played it to the people we wanted to have hear us. But it seemed impossible to contact anybody from the world of recording. Where was Decca? Where was EMI? We had no idea. Nowadays, people record in their own bedrooms on perfectly good mastering equipment. The technology is so fantastic. Daniel Bedingfield's first record was made at home. Well, there's no way we could have done that at home. Crikey, it was ridiculous. You could only hear the buses going by. So it's changed drastically, but there's a deal of good fortune that comes into it. Somebody had seen me singing in a pub. He said he didn't always go to the pub, but he happened to go to that pub that night. His name was John Foster. He heard my band and I play, and he came up to me and uttered the immortal words, and I promise you he did say, I'm going to make you a star. And I said, and we all felt, well, exactly that. We all fell about with laughter and said, oh, really, John, you're going to make us a star. Where are we going to start? Anyway, he's the one that got us to play in a competition. But the clever thing was, he told the manager of the theatre, I'm sorry, but the Cliff and the Drifters will not be competing, but we'll top the bill for free. Now, you say the word free and all sorts of bells jangle. So the guy said, okay. We came in as top of the bill. We were announced as top of the bill, and the kids went wild when I came on. And we sang about half a dozen songs, and they screamed and chased me down the road, and I got trapped in the gentleman's toilet on Shepherd's Bush Green. and it was fantastic. We went back the following month, did the same thing, and had an agent come and watch us. Now, he took this £5 record with him, played it to Norrie Paramore, and the rest is history. Norrie said, well, come do an audition. We wrote, Ian Samwell wrote Move It on the way to the audition. Incomplete. It only had one verse, so we did it twice. And that was it. My career started like that. So there's a deal of good fortune involved, and the rest of it's been grind.
John Foster, how did he find the time to get you these gigs in between working in the sewerage works?
I don't know what he did for a living.
Is that true? I read that on the internet.
I don't know about sewerage. He was... I never thought of him as working in the sewerage works, but he had a day job, that's for certain. And it was all of these things were done when we weren't working. So if all of us had jobs, so it could only ever happen in the evening and Saturdays. The Shepherd's Bush Gaumont had the competition, and it was a Saturday morning, so went to bed early Friday night. Well, we probably didn't. We just, 18, you don't need to bother to go to bed early. So that all took place in a very natural way. Just did it when we weren't working, in the hopes that one day we'd be working at something else, and that's what happened.
Frank Sinatra once said he panicked every time he went on the stage in his final years that it wouldn't be there. The voice wouldn't be as good as people remembered it. How do you cope psychologically with that?
Well, it's one of the difficult areas. When people talk about the pressures of show business, that's one of the main deals. The main worry is when you wake up in the morning and you're croaking and your voice is down like this because you've sung unnaturally for 2.5 hours the night before. Who sings for 2.5 hours? Only artists. We are doing something that's totally unnatural. It shouldn't happen to the vocal cords. It is an abuse of the vocal cords. But if that's your life, you have to find a way of getting around it. So usually... you'll spend most of the day saying, please let my voice be okay for the 2.5 hours tonight. And it usually works out that it is. But you go on stage, and I absolutely relate to what Sinatra said. You're constantly terrified that you're not going to be able to hit the notes. The thing about his voice, though, again, his was an exposed voice, like an opera voice is an exposed voice. As rock and roll singers, we can bend and change notes really, really easily. And so if there's a note that's really difficult to do, we can fake it, growl it, or whatever, and get by. And they were, as I say, much more exposed vocally. But it's nevertheless still terrifying to think that you're going in front of people who have bought the records, and you need to sound like those records. Otherwise, why would they come? They might as well go and see somebody else sing. So it's a huge, huge pressure. And there's absolutely no way around it. And I didn't recognize this until I took the year 2000 off. And during that year, I did absolutely nothing, no work at all, just enjoyed myself. But I woke up at least maybe 3 times with those razor blades in my throat. The panic set in instantly, and then I thought, wait a minute, I don't have to sing. I took no medicine. 3 days later, my voice was back to normal. And that's when I realized what pressure is really about. The pressure is that we spend the whole of our working careers desperate to sound good night after night, and sometimes failing because of flu or whatever it is that attacks us. And it's always going to be there, I'm afraid. But that's partly the job, and I think the satisfying factor is when you do a show and it wasn't as bad as you thought it was going to be.
Is a bad show to you still amazing to your audience?
I would like to think that the audience really don't notice. I think that if you go out there and sniffle and cough and sneeze and say, I'm terribly sorry, I'm not well, they'll notice everything. I had flu once, and the hardest thing to do was smile. I remember getting dressed, and I had to sit down to put my trousers on and sit down again and do them up. And I just felt so worn out. Your muscles all hurt. And I went out there, and the hardest thing to do was smile. I actually pulled myself together physically. Dr. Adrenaline got going, and everything pumped. And then people came backstage afterwards. Oh, it was a wonderful show. Thank you. Oh, your voice sounded so good. And I just kept smiling and thinking, oh, yeah. But if I'd said, oh, I'm suffering from flu, they'd say, oh, we thought we heard that.
Yeah.
They actually don't hear it. You feel it, and it would have to be really quite bad for them to actually notice that you'd had some problems on stage.
I want to talk about you now because I envy you so much because we see you as such a showbiz man. You know everybody. I mean, everybody knows Sir Cliff. What is your life like? I mean, I know at the moment you're quite pressured because you're having to talk to idiots like me all day long. Is it just fun? Are you able to enjoy the success now and know everybody you need to know? I mean, you said before you can play tennis, you can call a pro, he'll come and play with you. He won't do that for me. That's a great thrill and it's really the tribute to your talent, isn't it? I mean, is it all fun?
Well, the pro would actually play with you if you paid him.
Right.
But yes, it is fun. I'm enjoying it more now than I ever did, and I find that age does that for you. And as you get older, you lose fear. You lose the fear of competition, for instance. You begin to love competition. Like the Christmas single is a perfect example of where you're hoping like mad that everybody will release a record. Because if you're going to be number one, you might as well get past the best. If you don't make it past the best, it means that one of the best has beaten you, and there's no shame in that. So when they told me that Pop Idols was not going to release a record, I was really disappointed. Now I'm really thrilled because they are going to release one. But then so is John Lennon, so is Dido, and Darkness, and Craig David. They're all going to be there. And I'm thinking, fantastic, because I have got a good song. But you have to be philosophical and realize that if someone else has got a better one, and even if they haven't got a better one, but it captures the imagination of the people, you will be number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. But, that's what competition's about. So I find that as I get older, I'm more fearless. And and there's a great joy in that. There's a great pleasure in thinking, I can go and do all these things, and I don't give a darn, win or lose. I'm in the competition. So there's a new element in it that wasn't there when I was 18. When I was 18, I had to be in the competition, and I had to win. Now I'm thinking I just have to be in the competition, and sometimes I will win.
Will it ruin your Christmas if you don't get to number 1?
No, it won't actually. No, I haven't been to number 1 most of the times. I mean, I've released 127 top 30 hit singles, and only 14 have been number 1. So if what you're suggesting was true, that I was going to be I'd be depressed for the whole of my career. It doesn't work that way. It's just nice to be part of the game. And if it's number 1, it's an incredible bonus. It will be a wonderful Christmas, but nothing's going to ruin my Christmas. Nothing ever has in the past.
Do you ever think about what will happen after you're gone and the fact that your records will still be in shops and it'll still be selling out and people will still be playing your music and the fact that you have lasted so long and had such an impact on life that maybe in 100 years people will still be playing your songs?
Well, I don't know about 100 years, because don't forget, things change and a new generation of people come along and they find their own tastes have got into a different area. The only reason why I would be there is because I would be in somebody's archives. My recordings will be available for anyone to listen to. But it would take some enterprising DJ in 60 years' time to say, look, this is what happened. Listen to this. We Don't Talk Anymore sounds like a contemporary record. You know what I mean? Someone would have to do that for it to actually be proven and be applicable to the question. So I don't know what people are going to think in 100 years' time. But yes, I like the idea that what film... DVDs and things are done now, they have immortalized us. Whether they'll ever be heard or seen again, I don't know, but someone is bound to be curious. There's always been a buff, and even now today, I know Bob Monkhouse has always been a cinema buff, so he has a fantastic collection of old movies and things, and even scripts he collected, I believe. So there's always going to be somebody, so there's bound to be somebody there with an anorak on in the year 2080 who thinks Cliff is great. Who knows?
You were immortalised this year in a musical. Did you see it?
No, I didn't see that. I was away at the time. I don't think I'd like to have seen it, though. It's a bit disconcerting that they would do that, but... I don't think it lasted, so it couldn't have been that great. I still wish that I had this idea. I mean, I always have great ideas, but don't ever follow through with it. Years and years ago, when I recorded Carrie and Devil Woman, so that must have been late 60s, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I thought, would it be fantastic if I could put together a stage musical using the songs like Miss Unites, We Don't Talk Anymore, Carrie. Carrie is about a guy looking for someone, and she just doesn't seem to exist. Now, was she killed? Was she abducted and taken away? So there's already a hint of a mysterious storyline there. We Don't Talk Anymore. It's a breakdown of a relationship. We just don't talk to each other anymore. Miss Unites. She's gone. I'm so sad. There's such a wealth of storylines in some of these songs, and I never did it. And of course, the best version of this idea is in Mamma Mia, where they put a very simple but rather attractive storyline, I thought, to these fantastic songs. The only thing is they made a joke of it. When I first went, I was so disappointed because I loved these songs, and when I heard the girl go, "I don't want to talk," and I thought, tears started to come because it was a poignant moment, and the audience all rolled with laughter, and I felt totally out of it. And I thought, why are they laughing? And I'm feeling the moment. I'm feeling this moment. But I saw this was in the preview. And apparently they then realized that everyone was laughing because the songs were so obviously huge hits that everybody knew. And they were laughing almost... Sometimes you can laugh when you're embarrassed. Oh, they're using that song for this? That kind of laughter. And they actually then changed the production around, so they played to the laugh, for the laugh. And when I saw it a second time, I laughed as well. But my first thought was that, gosh, I wish I'd done what I planned to do 20 years ago. Was to put some not just my pop songs, but find these songs. Some of our pop records have had great stories. They've got fantastic emotions in them, and would lend themselves easily to a contemporary musical.
I don't wish to be rude, but there's still time.
Oh, I know there is, but it's horrible everyone assumes you did it second. That's why I mentioned about Rod and Robbie doing these old standards when I did them 40 years ago, because it's too late, though, and I already had planned to do an album similarly. I planned to have released it 2 years ago, and I was building up a repertoire of songs which I was using on stage and finding that the audience first, whether they liked them or not, and they had started to really love them. So I'd got as far as getting 9 tracks together, arranged, had done them live, was going to go into the studio when Swing When You're Winning came out, and I thought, oh, that's it, darn it, Robbie, I'm not going to do it now. I don't want to appear second to anybody.
Is that the reason for your success, that you're an innovator and you don't follow?
Well, we all influenced, but you can follow the bandwagon. You can even jump on it, but don't stay on it for too long. You just grab what's good, and it influences you, permeates through your life, and then you somehow change it. It's like a drum sound. I remember doing records where I played Brenda Lee's "Dum Dum Dilly Dum" because the drum went... And I said, that's the drum sound I want. And so we never got the exact drum sound, but the engineer was influenced by that sound. And sure enough, we got a cracking sound on the drummer. I can't even remember what song it was. But you're influenced, but you don't have to copy. You should be innovative enough to present yourself as often as people write songs.
Very finally, faith. How important is that to you still?
Well, Elvis changed my lifestyle, but Jesus changed my life. Your life, people say, get a life. I got a life when he entered my life. The whole idea that you can succumb to a being greater than yourself, particularly in our industry. We are blown up to such unimaginable proportions in the eyes and the minds of the public. The danger is that you believe it yourself. And I think a lot of artists have come a cropper because they did believe it themselves. And then they just seem to be fragile, crumbling human beings. So I think that Jesus has been a massive influence on my life. The fact that God exists, as far as I'm concerned, without any shadow of a doubt, gives me a motivation. It also keeps me from being depressed in a world that should only lead to depression. How can we not be depressed when we are waged war upon by terrorists who we don't even know as individuals exist, other than bin Laden? So there's a depressive factor to the world that we can't seem to get the peace that we want into everybody's psyche. So God helps me say to myself, He is in control. It may look as though He's not in control, but He is in control. He has never made us robots. He gave us free choice, and some people choose to bomb the Twin Towers. Some people choose to maim and kill people in nightclubs by putting a bomb outside, or embassies around the world. And there's almost nothing we can do about that except say it. We hate them for, not them, but we hate their actions. It would be interesting to meet someone like that, whether they would be interested. Because I've got friends who are politically opposed to what I would vote, and yet we've always remained really good, hugging friends. And I can't see why that shouldn't be the same of the world in general, that we should have differences of opinion and differences in our culture, and be able to go, well, it's been fabulous having you over for the weekend. Well, enjoy your trip back to wherever you live, and I wish you a good life. And it just doesn't seem to make it. So God has been a major part of my life for a long time, and I do believe He has a part to play still in my future and in myself as a man.
Sir Cliff Richard, thank you so much for your time and your indulgence today and giving me this opportunity to speak to you. It's been a real thrill. If you want to see Cliff live, well, you've got an opportunity next year, but I have to tell you there are no tickets left if you want to see him at the Royal Albert Hall. I think there's like one ticket left. There's no point even mentioning that. However, there's a DVD out. The World Tour 2003 Cliff is available. And Cliff at Christmas is this new CD out. It's a great, great CD. And the song that's going to be number one at Christmas, dare we say it, is Santa's List. And it's a really fun song and it's a great song. And once again, Sir Cliff Richard, thank you so much for sparing the time to talk to us today here in your home. Thank you.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks a lot.